So I'm a software developer, but I took a rather unusual path to learning to code. I taught myself how to code by making 180 websites in 180 days. So I grew up on the east coast of the United States in a suburb of Philadelphia, where my family has lived for over 250 years as farmers and small business owners. And while there was a lot of do-it-yourself spirit in my community, there wasn't a lot in the way of art and technology. And growing up, I didn't have any role models for what a software engineer even was. So when I went to college, I ended up studying fine art, in part because it had absolutely nothing to do with farming, but also because I was really passionate about making things. So while I was there, I ended up going to an art museum with a friend, and we were wandering the halls. We got down to the basement, we turned around a corner, and we were confronted with this. An amazing sculpture. It's Ron Mueck's Big Man, and this sculpture is incredible. It's a 7-foot-tall, hyper-realistic sculpture of a very large dude, and it's absolutely breathtaking. As soon as my friend and I stepped into the space, we immediately dropped our voices down to a whisper. It was that powerful. And I remember thinking to myself how unfathomable it was that this thing even existed. I mean, the sheer size of this thing, the weight, the cost, and especially the amount of skill an artist would need to build something so complicated and so detailed and so beautiful. It was an experience I took with me all the way through grad school. So after grad school, I felt like there was this explosion of technology happening all around me. We have all these amazing products that are getting made, from open source projects like Docker. We have new communication platforms like Twitter, wearables, Internet of Things, all these amazing things. And I realized I wasn't satisfied with just using these products. I wanted to get out there and actually be able to build them. I wanted to learn to code. Now, when a lot of people think about what it takes to learn how to code, they think, oh, I have to go to some special course, and I need to take special classes and get certification, and then I'll finally be able to make some web apps or something. But along with this explosion in technology has been an explosion in information. And so all the knowledge you need is actually already out there online, and most of it's free. So as long as you have a project that you want to work on and the motivation to do it, you already have all the tools that you need to be able to learn and grow. And I love working on self-directed projects. So I knew when I wanted to learn to code that going through a boot camp or an online course just wasn't going to work for me. So when I started thinking about what a good self-directed project would look like, I came up with a few guidelines for myself. So first, I wanted to start small. I knew that I had never done any coding before, and so I wanted to take these large coding concepts and condense them down into something manageable, something I could tackle as a beginner. 2, I wanted to code something I could see. I wanted what I was working on to result in something tangible, and so that I could play with it and explore. And then 3 is I knew in order to develop the interactive dynamic web apps I was ultimately interested in making, I would need to develop for the full stack. So that left me with a couple of different ideas for how to approach this. First, I thought, okay, well, why don't I take a few small websites and just start there, and then eventually jump onto something bigger. And this was appealing in a lot of ways because, I didn't know what I was doing, so this would allow me to get comfortable with tools for building websites and also how websites were even built. But then I was left with the nagging question of how many of these websites would I need to make before I moved on to something bigger? And would I ever actually feel like moving on to something bigger? So I said, okay, what if I just jump right in, tackle one big app? And this is appealing to me in a lot of ways because it would get me right to what I was ultimately interested in doing. And a lot of people have gone down that path themselves and been very successful. But as a beginner, this seemed like a really large mountain of knowledge to try to climb. So that left me with the third crazy option, which was build 180 websites in 180 days. And it turned out this was great. For me, it was an intense, immersive learning environment that allowed me to explore any and all ideas that I found interesting along the way, and gave me plenty of room for productive failure. So I set out 3 rules for myself. First, I would build one website, one website a day, one website a day, every single day for 180 days. Each website would be accompanied by a blog post. And 3, all of the code that I wrote would be publicly published on GitHub. And so throughout the project, I was able to do a whole bunch of different things. I was able to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Ruby on Rails, even a little bit of Node.js. I was able to make toys, games, tools, data visualizations, even real-time communication apps. And by the end, I was able to build the dynamic, interactive web apps I'd originally set out to do. So on April 1st, 2013, I made the very first website for the project, and that's the homepage. Now, this is just a couple of lines of HTML and CSS, and it took me all freaking day to do. So it's not much, but it was a start. And so by day 3, I was ready to get into some interactive JavaScript awesomeness. This is random color background, and as you can see, you click the button up the top, you get a random color background. So it's a really simple concept, but I was super excited about this because it was the first time I had made something that people could actually interact with and change. And now that I had the power of JavaScript as an arbitrary coding language, I was able to go out and explore a whole array of coding concepts. So object-oriented programming came pretty quickly for me. This is dropping boxes. This is from day 15. And here you can see I'm already starting to think about these objects on the screen as little individual beings. And so you click on them, they get a CSS animation that I coded up. And I really like this one just because the boxes all seem to take on their own little individual personalities. And this would also mark the start of something of a CSS obsession of mine at the beginning of the project. And so this is Silly Kitty, and this is the ultimate expression of that CSS obsession. So this is all done with CSS. There's no images on the screen. There's just a couple of JavaScript handlers, and it's 656 lines of CSS. Yeah. So I was super proud of it, really excited by it, but I also realized that maybe I should start thinking about using proper JavaScript objects. And so a few days later, I made Little Dude. This is from day 36. And he's this little Tamagotchi guy. You can feed him, you can hug him, you can play with him, and like all good Tamagotchis, you can kill him. And he still depends really heavily on CSS, particularly for how he looks, but he is a proper JavaScript object, and he is maintaining his own state. And so here we have Picnic from day 126, and so at this point I've got a good handle on JavaScript objects. All of these little bugs on the screen are their own individual objects, and they're all managing their own state on the system. And you can see that they're interacting both with the mouse the cursor to try avoid getting squished. Then they're also interacting with each other and actually transferring energy as they bump into each other across the blanket. And I got into physics for a while, so once I started working with JavaScript objects, I naturally gravitated toward the HTML5 canvas element. And this is one of the things I did during the project that I wouldn't have necessarily done going through a boot camp or an online course, but it was actually really incredible because it gave me the opportunity to use JavaScript as an arbitrary coding language and actually explore coding concepts using JavaScript. So this is from day 55. It's called Paratroopers. It's a little game where the object is to land your paratroopers on that island so that they can take a vacation. And I had not done any physics to speak of since high school when I started this project. So getting those little dudes to jump out of that plane and fall through the air in a realistic way was a pretty complicated task for me. It took me a while to figure out the formulas and equations to get it to work. So I was really happy by the end of the day that I was able to make it happen. So the next day, I took a little breather. Okay, it's supposed to say hooray. And came back the next day with Bug Blaster. So this is a little cannon game where we have these bugs up in the sky and you're supposed to hit them with this cannon, and you can adjust the parameters. So this was also another difficult physics problem for me to tackle, and it took a long time for me to actually get the cannon to work correctly. So I didn't get to add as much design as I wanted to, but then a friend mentioned that I'd gone basically from 0 to 2D kinematics in 2 days, so I felt a little bit better about that. And this is Plinky. This is from day 123, and this is based off of my favorite Price is Right game, Plinko. And you can see you drop a disc, and it has to bounce off these little pins, and you're supposed to get it into the green area. And I had set out on the day to make this unbelievably awesome game, and it was incredibly difficult for me to actually get that ball to bounce off of those pins correctly. So it ended up taking to the wee hours of the morning just to get it this far. So I was pretty bummed because I had set out to do something a lot more with this and didn't get as far as I wanted to. So I felt like kind of a failure, but in reality, there were a number of failure days throughout the project. So the first failure day comes from day 8. This is more drop shadow, and I had this vague concept of you could give users an ability to kind of play with the drop shadow design element, and I don't know. But what ended up happening is I started the day, and I made a mock, and I made another mock-up, and I made another mock-up, and before I knew it, it was 8 o'clock at night, I had nothing on the screen, and I was totally panicking. So I just quick grabbed whatever mock I could find, and this is what I came up with, and I was totally bummed out about this because I hadn't executed on my vision. It's already day 8, and I'm failing hard, and like, what is this crap? How am I gonna show this to somebody? And in reality, as much as I was upset, I hadn't failed, right? I had never set out in my rules that every website had to be great, or even good, or mediocre. And in fact, the failure days often came with really valuable and interesting lessons. So this is the San Francisco Hipster Quiz, and it's just a basic form. And it was super easy for me to get that up and running. But it turns out writing content is incredibly difficult. In fact, so difficult that it took me 8 hours just to write the content for this dumb quiz. And some failures are I can be kind of proud of. This is Swivel. This is from day 193. And I had this idea for a game where you had these wedges, and then when you clicked on one, it would turn, and then when the edge of a wedge lined up with the edge of another wedge, then that wedge would turn. It would set off this crazy chain reaction, and there would be points and strategies and bells and whistles and all this fancy stuff around it. And it turns out, you might be surprised, that it's kind of hard and tricky to get that system actually working correctly. So it took me several tries over the course of the day, and at the end of the day, I didn't get to add in any of the gameplay that I wanted. So in that sense, it was kind of a failure. But I still think it's really cool that I got the system to work, and in fact, it's kind of fun to watch the system go from this chaotic state into a lot of order. And sometimes failures can be really amazing and interesting. So this is fireworks. This is from day 58. And I set out with the day, and I said, okay, I've got 3 main goals that I need to hit. 1, I got to get that rocket to go up in the air. 2, I got to get the particles to explode out and fall down the screen. And then 3, I got to style it, make it so that those particles kind of fade out randomly and that the fireworks at the top are bigger, and basically just make it look like fireworks. So I started with step 1, that was great. I got to step 2, that looked good. And then I figured, okay, I better, I've got all these particles falling off the screen, and I better, clean them up out of the array so I don't end up with a memory leak blowing up my browser. So I went in and did that real quick. And then I came back just to check on things, and everything was perfect. It looked amazing. I had beautiful, randomly fading out particles. There was even these trailers that were really cool. I was like, I have no idea what's going on here, but you know what? Fuck it, ship it. I'm good to go. I get a couple extra hours of sleep. And it wasn't until later that night that I started thinking about it. And you know how you're not supposed to delete items from array in place? Turns out the visual representation of that is fireworks. And so I didn't lose my artistic side during the project. My family was keeping along with me, and especially in the early days, I'd inevitably make a website that didn't have quite enough direction about what you were supposed to do, and my family would very helpfully send me an email telling me my website was broken for the day because they were too afraid to actually click somewhere and break something. So that's where the idea for Snare came from. And this is TOS. This is the terms of service for jenniferdewalt.com. And it's actually been adapted from Automatic's Terms of Service for WordPress, which is released under a Creative Commons share-alike license. And this is Electrobounce. I love this one. This is from day 196. And so we have these nodes on the screen, and they're bouncing around. And then when they get close to each other, a line forms between them. And as they move away, the line dissipates. And you can change all these parameters from the speed, the distance, the color, the width, all these different things. And I love how you get so many different moods and emotions and feelings from this app. So I'd love to see this one installed in a party or something where people can come up and play with it and change the way it looks based on how the feeling of the room is. And I made a bunch of tools during the project as well. So this is Email Impact, and the point of this is to help you keep your emails concise, because nobody likes really long, drawn-out, boring emails. And so here, as you type in words, the font actually contracts and gets smaller, so the more content you put in, the harder it is to read. And this is Trees for the Forest. So this is a big favorite of mine. So this is from day 117. And I mentioned that I got really into physics for a while. I also started thinking about things like how code reflects reality and how math is related to code and nature and all these crazy geeky things. And I came to fractals. I started thinking about fractals, and I remembered that as a kid, when I learned to draw trees, I learned by drawing these crazy fractal patterns. So here, for Trees for the Forest, you can actually click on the screen and they grow these beautiful fractal trees and add colorful leaves to them. And when you have your whole scene ready and beautiful, you can actually download it to save it for later. And then this is ColorWorks. So this is a tool that I actually needed in the project, so I built it. Every day I was creating a new color palette, and I needed to very rapidly build up the shades and the textures and colors for what I was working on that day, for buttons and headers and shadows and all that stuff. So I came up with this because I needed to very quickly play with the saturation and the lightness and darkness of colors. And this is an app I still use, actually. Whenever I'm working on a new color palette, I go to this one. And color became an interesting theme throughout the whole project. And I've always been interested in color, but it's not something I've ever worked with extensively before this project. As an artist, I started out working with black and white photography. I tend to wear a lot of black, but I think the reason it became so important is because color is one of the more important tools we have as developers for conveying our meaning. And so I made a bunch of games too. This is Simon, and Simon was a really popular game back when I was a kid, and it was super cool because it was all like electronic and made beepy noises, so now I can play it whenever I want. And here's Etch-a-Sketch. This is also from kind of my crazy CSS mind days. This is all done with CSS. And I have memories of fighting with my sister in the backseat of our car over whose Etch-a-Sketch was better. But it turns out that even though I have a background in art, I've never been a very good Etch-a-Sketch artist. And this is Snake. This is a really interesting game. It actually dates back to the late 70s, but didn't become popular until the late 90s when Nokia released a cell phone that had this game preloaded on it, which, if anybody remembers the late 90s, that was like a really big freaking deal. And so after making a few real-world games, I decided to try my hand at making one of my own. So this is Alien Attack, and this is a game based off of Atari games. My dad had this old Atari gaming system, and I loved playing with them because the games, even though the graphics were really basic, the gameplay was really easy to get started with and really hard to master. So this is based off of one of those games. And then when I started using Rails, I started thinking about how to connect people together. I finally had the ability to allow people to leave like a signature or some sort of mark that showed other people that they had been there. So I came up with Click Counter, and as you can see, the button's been clicked over 300,000 times. And then a few days later, I decided to see what Little Dude was up to. So this is Make a Dude, and here you can make your own Little Dude, and you give him a name, a message, a color, and when he's all styled up, you can submit him, and he will join the army of Little Dudes on the homepage. And when I say army, I mean army. There are over 16,000 Little Dudes that have been made and counting. And here we have Tiny Notes. This is from day 80. This is totally not a ripoff of a famous social network. So you enter in your message on the left-hand side, and then it goes into the feed on the right. And of course, most of the notes that were made are just kind of garbage spitting out to the ether, as the internet likes to do. But a lot of people took the opportunity to actually say something very specific to me with the app. And I got really into data, so this is weather now. So you enter in your city, and it queries the World Weather Online API and returns the current weather displayed really simply. And here we have elevations. This is a favorite of mine too. So you enter in two cities. Here we've got San Francisco and New York. I'm going to go in, and this queries the Google Places API and gets the elevations between the two places and then displays it on the screen, so you get a visual representation of the terrain actually between these two cities. And this is day 165, and I'm really hitting my stride here. I'm pulling together all sorts of different concepts that I've been working on, everything from physics to sound to data visualization, even shareability. And so the way this works is we've got different notes on the screen. Those are the colored dots. And you can move them around. You can add as many as you want. And then from the center, we have these pulses that are coming out. And you can add more of those as well. And as the pulses move out, they pass by the notes and they pluck them and they flash. And so you can add all of these different things, get them all styled up. And the thing I really love about this app is that the more visual beauty you put into the system, the more audio discord goes into it. So it's a really interesting contrast between the two. Okay, real fast, close it up. So at the end of the project, I started using Node.js, which gave me access to real-time data. So here we've got a bunch of hashtags on the screen. These are listening to the Twitter streaming API, and as those hashtags come in, they flash on the screen and they get tallied up into a positivity rating, so you can see how happy Twitter is right now. And from day 179, this is AllDraw, and it's a collaborative drawing app. And so here you can join with your friends, and you can sketch together, you can draw messages, you can mess up each other's stuff, whatever. And the thing that has always fundamentally fascinated me about the internet is its ability to connect us in a way that we can share ideas and information in basically real time. And I think AllDraw really encapsulates that feeling for me. So those are 40 of my websites, and along with the other 140 that I made is how I taught myself to code by making 180 websites in 180 days. Thank you.